Welcome to the July meeting for Boston Office 365 User Group, or if we like to call it BOS 365. We have on screen here a list of the many places that you can find us or follow us or connect with us in any way, shape, or form. Please feel free to do so.
You might want to add that and not the whole three.
Are we still the goop?
Yeah.
We are still the goop. Thank you. We'll take note of that. Getting rid of the goop. All right. So, yes.
Make sure the screen is being shared. Actually, I'm sorry, you're fine.
I was just going to say, it was a little while ago. All right, so these are the organizers of the group. We have Dimitry, who's actually going to be presenting today. Dimitri's founder of digital partner over at TrnDigital. Myself, I am the senior consultant over at Wellington Street Consulting, and who is not appearing today, Mr. David Losey, who is now a solution architect, just got promoted, over at Slalom Consulting. So any complaints, feel free to send them to David. And quick survey. I see a lot of new faces in here today, actually. So we want to find out which of our many, many efforts is actually working for us. How many people here found us? Well, actually, let me do this first. How many people here, is this their first event that they've attended for Office 365? Okay, cool. And how many people here first heard about us through Eventbrite? Nobody. Okay, cool. How about LinkedIn? All right. Meetup? Okay. How about YouTube? We now have a YouTube channel. It's very exciting. We're content creators, moving up in the world. Twitter? Twitter. Okay, a couple of Twitter folks. Facebook? Nobody. Email? We have a big newsletter. There's lots of people in that database. So, how about the BOS 365 website? Anybody find that? Not recently, you didn't, but all right. Friend or colleague? Okay, 3, 4. Awesome. All right. Thank you very much. Oh, all right. I'm hitting the wrong button on the presenter tool. So last time we had Mr. Chris Bortlick was helping us out and presenting for us on assembling engaging communication sites. Anybody here take away anything from that they implemented in the past month? Anything? Some pretty good stuff in there. I think I utilized some of that stuff since then. Really cool. So anyways, that presentation is up online now. You can watch it on YouTube if you didn't manage to make it to our meeting last week or last month. And then since last time, there have been a few updates to Office 365. And by that, I mean there have been a mess load. So we're not going over all of them, but we did curate a couple of the really big ones that we thought were worth discussing. The first one is Microsoft announced that Teams is now free. That was kind of a shocker. So I personally have been doing Teams migrations for the past year, so this move kind of took me by surprise, but it's basically Microsoft going directly after Slack. There is, at the URL that I provided here, there's actually a really good comparison you get with the free offering versus the paid offerings. I also wrote down a summary of what's included and what's missing specifically in that free offering here on the slide. So some really interesting stuff there. OneDrive Message Center is getting a bunch of updates. It's now going to automatically pause synchronizing whenever the battery saver is turned on. So it's kind of a nice thing, save a little bit of power. There is also, I thought this was interesting, so I took note of this. There is an option to override that and say sync anyway.
Is that only Windows 10 or other?
I am not sure of that. Check the link below. It may only be Windows 10 because there are some other things that are Windows 10 only features within OneDrive. So they're also adding a feedback system in there, which is very similar to the feedback system that they have in a lot of their other applications. They're just adding it directly into OneDrive. And also an updated activity center. I actually added the screenshot for the updated activity center here, and some of you that use this all the time may notice that it's actually giving a lot more information now, which is really helpful. Oh, it's not this screenshot, but there was another one where it'll actually flag if something was removed as well. I thought that was a nice touch. So not only what it's syncing, but what it has stopped syncing as well. So all of this is going to start rolling out in July, this month. And then at Insight, announcing, oh no, this isn't the Insight one. I got ahead of myself. This is intelligent event capabilities in Microsoft Office, in Microsoft 365. So when doing events now, you can now stream live events into Microsoft Stream. And those are going to include speaker timelines, which include facial detection, and text-to-speech and closed captioning. It'll also allow you to search the transcripts and put time codes in those transcripts, so you can jump right to where you are. Has anybody been using Stream at all? Okay, so for those of you that are familiar with Stream, what's new about this is just the ability to do it live directly into Stream. Stream actually has these capabilities for doing the facial detection and all of the timelining and the automatic transcripting. And what's really cool about the automated transcripting is the content of that transcript then gets indexed by the crawler. So when you do a search in SharePoint, if there's a keyword that came up in that video, it'll come up to that, and it can actually even jump the video right to where that keyword was said, which is really cool stuff. So good stuff in there. I think it's highly underutilized. And then, so this is the one from Insight. Microsoft announced SharePoint Business Apps Partner Program. So Microsoft is going to start partnering with service providers and independent software vendors who specialize in the areas listed here. And people who participate within this program are going to get the list of benefits listed below there. So if you're looking to integrate whatever your product is, or do some really cool app development that you want tight integration in, could be worthwhile to look into this program. Get the inside scoop, have less surprises come up as you're moving forward with your projects. That's always nice. All right. And then that's pretty much it that I have. I started doing a write-up here and ran out of time. New modern workplace features. They're adding a lot of new stuff to the My Analytics. There's a feature called nudges to kind of get you back to work. Interesting stuff there. I did at least add the URL, so you guys can go check that out if you'd like. So, any updates that we missed? Anybody else hear about anything really big? I did not have an opportunity to do a very thorough list this month. So, anybody think of anything big? No? All right. One of the other things that was mentioned earlier is apparently Microsoft has announced that Teams now has feature parity with Skype for Business, meaning anything that you can do in Skype for Business, you can now do in Teams, or at the very least, that's starting to roll out now, which is pretty impressive because that's right on target with their roadmap that they released almost a year ago. They said that July was when they would hit that milestone. So
you think Teams is eventually going to replace Skype for Business?
Oh, Teams is definitely going to eventually replace Skype for Business. That's a foregone conclusion. Microsoft announced that about a year ago, that Teams was going to be slated to do that. They just haven't announced any end of life date or anything for that. And as a matter of fact, they have announced that there's going to be a Skype for Business 2019 edition. So it's probably going to be at least, I would say, 3 to 5 years out from the release date of that product.
They have a new app checker for Power Apps.
Yeah, I heard about that. What does that do exactly?
It checks your apps for compatibility issues.
Okay. So new app checker that checks for security and compatibility issues. Oh, and accessibility. Very cool. Awesome. All right. What's that?
Metadata on SharePoint modern pages?
Really?
Yeah.
Oh,
First
that's
out.
huge.
First release has it.
Oh, yeah.
Really?
Wasn't it today?
General availability is getting it before they have the launch.
Wow. Yay. Yes. I share in that yay. That's fantastic. Awesome. All right. And a huge thanks to TrnDigital. They paid for this group, got us our grub today, and are helping pay all the bills behind getting this stuff organized. So thank you to TrnDigital for that. And without further ado, I will hand this over to Mr. Dimitry, who is going to teach us about building user-centric intranets using Office 365 communication sites and the SharePoint framework. Right?
Thanks,
Did I
Mike.
get it all?
You got it.
All right.
Mike was pinging me earlier today, and I am asking if I can come up with a shorter title for this presentation, but we decided to keep it as is.
That is the
Mike's still recording?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So everyone, thanks for coming out today. We just finished building a pretty exciting intranet for one of our clients, and we're lucky that this client has blessed us to come and share our learnings, including our designs and wireframes and even some screenshots of the finished product with this team and this group here. So we'll dive right in. I'm going to try to keep this to about an hour or less. I could probably spend days talking about this because we did a lot of really cool things. But as we go along, if you have any questions, feel free to raise your hand. I don't mind pausing throughout the session to make sure everyone's still on track and answer any questions you might have. So a little bit about myself. I co-founded TrnDigital about 2 years ago now with a few other partners, and we're really focused a lot on the Microsoft technologies, specifically Office 365 and Azure. And we handle a bunch of other things, but that's kind of our key focus area. I co-founded this user group with Mike and Dave, and back then a few others years ago. And I've been working in the space for quite a while. Most of my career has been in consulting and really helping large Fortune 500 companies navigate the ever-changing world of technology and really applying that to business processes and improvement. And I've also been with SharePoint since the good old days of at least 2005. It's been a journey, to say the least, but I'm glad I've had the experience to go through it and meet a lot of great people along the way. So today's agenda, I want to give you a quick client profile, just to explain a little bit about who the client was, what they do. We want to talk about what really motivated this project to begin and what are some of the challenges that they faced in their old intranet before we started this project. We want to talk about how we actually defined what we were going to build and then how we built it. We also want to talk about, after we built the actual technology side of the intranet, what process we went through collectively to actually build out the content and the sites within the new sites, how we handle communications, and essentially, what go live looked like and next steps. Before I jump in, I would like to see a quick show of hands. Who has worked on an intranet project in any capacity in their career? Okay, most people. So I think you can find this very relatable. Out of that, how many people have done it on Office 365? Okay. How many have done it with communication sites? Okay. So I think a lot of what we're going to show here is our lessons learned through working with the latest and greatest technologies. And mind you, we started this project last August. So communication sites in August looked very differently than what they look like today. And we had to keep aligning in step with Microsoft as we built this out. So let's dive into the client profile. So the client is Ironwood Pharmaceuticals. Ironwood is a commercial biotech company based in Kendall Square. They have about 900 users of their intranet. About half are in their main headquarters, about half are in the field and working at remote locations. And I gotta say, like, out of all of our clients over the years, the culture at Ironwood is really something different. It's really collaborative. There's a lot of company value and culture. It's different than most other public companies that are out there. And I think part of what we strive to do with this intranet is to help reflect that culture in a digital means, which was very fundamental as we went through every step of this process. So let's talk about previous intranets. And anyone that's ever built an intranet has probably seen some of these challenges beforehand. Their intranet is called Ironworks, and the biggest challenge they had was that Ironworks was not considered a primary source of information for their organization, and that was for quite a few different reasons. There was a weak search experience with the previous platform. It was not based on SharePoint, it was based on a different platform. The licensing costs for that platform were also quite pricey compared to Microsoft's offering. It was complicated to create content, especially if you wanted to have multiple different page layouts and different ways of being more interactive. It wasn't responsive, so the field force that was out there on their iPads and their iPhones struggled to really even connect and consume any kind of information. Because of a lot of these challenges, people didn't pay a lot of attention to it, which caused content to become stale, unused, which kind of fed more of the downward spiral of no one uses it because you can't find what you need, and you can't find what you need because no one uses it to update it, and it wasn't in a good spot. Furthermore, we saw that like over half of all of the different content spaces on this intranet were inactive, and we defined inactive by saying they haven't been touched in over 6 months. So part of the process was to clean up and not move forward anything that was no longer active. And the other part was that there wasn't any kind of governance body on top of the intranet. So there was no one there reviewing content and making sure things are up to date, making sure old things are removed, making sure that business changes were reflected properly in the intranet. And they were doing good from a corporate communications perspective of posting information. But from going into the departments and finding like the latest HR benefits forms and other things, you might find some outdated content sometimes. And that proved challenging. If we can't trust this as a source of truth, why should we spend a lot of time going to it? We also have a screenshot of what the old intranet looked like. And it would look great for like a late 90s, early 2000s intranet. But I think in this day and age, we could do a bit better. And I think we'll show you what we have done better. So new intranet definition. So the first thing we really did was to establish the mission statement, what we were all coming together to accomplish, and really where this intranet fit within the corporate list of communication channels, digital workplaces, and really what this is all about. And the mission statement was really defined to establish a centralized communication and productivity platform where employees and contractors have a useful tool to use as teams as they strive to really fulfill the core mission of the company, which is to improve patient life and through medicine and everything else, all the great things that Ironwood does. So they really didn't see this as just another tool or just another tool to like reduce how much email I get every day. They really saw this as a fundamental way to start working in a way that's better using the latest technologies available. The next thing we did was really define the team structure to make this successful. We knew that if this was going to be strictly an IT-led project or if this was owned only by one department, it would be really good for that one department, and then it wouldn't really establish the objective of being enterprise-wide. So we established a core team of about 12 to 16 people. Throughout the course of the project, there were some people that were added and removed, but ultimately we had a good representation from some of the key areas of the company. Corporate communications played a large role, as did IT, enterprise content management. Most intranet projects in general have a tight partnership between the IT side and the business side, typically corporate comms, typically the ECM space, because you really need two to work together to build something that is sustainable and fits the needs of the business. That being said, we've also had a few core team members coming in from HR, from finance, from R&D, as well as sales, which on a high level represented the different functional areas of the company. While we were certainly not going to share the org structure of Ironwood, there was a very careful exercise to look at the overall company map of responsibilities, ownership, and so forth to make sure that we had the boxes checked for every one of the different functional areas to be represented. Now, a core team is only as good as the executive oversight coming from the steering committee, because the steering committee is really what could take the message that the core team is delivering, amplify it out, and really make sure that people pay attention and give this the time it needs for the project to be successful. We were very lucky to have a couple of SVPs on the steering committee, as well as a VP, senior directors and directors. And I think the steering committee really was fundamental to making this project successful because they were able to clear any roadblocks, give us direction where there was multiple valid options, and overall make sure that this is not seen as some small project off to the side, but actually enforced through their communications and their blogging and their leadership. So takeaway, putting together the right team on both levels is very critical to making the project successful. So from there, we decided we needed to start talking to the employees and really start doing one-on-one interviews to understand what works well with the current intranet, what doesn't work well, and what could be better. So we took a sampling across the organization. We looked at the same org chart, and we would try to pick employees that were at different seniority levels within the company. They spent different amount of time with the company. So somebody that's been there for 1 year versus 3 months versus 10 years or 20 years. And we also try to pick people from different divisions. Ultimately, when we broke everything down, it came out to be about 50 stakeholders. And I think this was a good amount to have the right balance of different competing interests and needs and wants. From there, we scheduled these interviews, and we would typically sit down and talk through them. And after we understood from their perspective what works well today, what doesn't work well today, what could be better, we started showing examples of other successful intranets and really started to co-brainstorm for what a successful intranet could look like for Ironwood. And we did this with all 50 stakeholders. And at the end of the interviews, we really looked at all the different features and functionalities that we brainstormed together, and we asked to group them into 3 buckets: a must-have, a nice-to-have, and a shouldn't-have. And I will show you in the next slide what we did with the information, but ultimately we walked away with a vast amount of knowledge from all different parts of the organization. I think this was really critical to make sure that what we were building was actually going to be successful and work for Ironwood. So from there, we did quite a bit of analysis on these 3 buckets of must-have, nice-to-have, shouldn't-have, and we started to assign different scores to the different components. We also started to look at standard deviations and how many different employees voiced an opinion about different topics. So very systematically, we were able to derive general platform capabilities, homepage functionality, and department site functionality. I mean, we broke it down this way because this is really a day one for a new intranet. We didn't want to make things overly complicated, so we really kept into these 3 initial buckets to get going. But furthermore, we wanted to make sure that all opinions that were voiced were recorded and added to a backlog for future phases. So what you see in the top 3 tables here are the features that had the most opinions raised on them. What you see in the bottom tables are opinions that were voiced, but were voiced by 1 or 2 people. Actually, we used 3 as the cutoff. So if 3 or less people talked about something, we decided that it wasn't going to be as important for this first release. So once we understood the requirements, we understood the priorities. And actually, if I go back 1 slide, we also had a budget to work with. So just because everything was a must-have does not mean we can necessarily done everything in the first phase. So we actually worked together to understand what is the right place to draw the lines between the different features. Furthermore, for each of these line items, we also had a separate PowerPoint slide where we met as a core team, and we refined what each of these details meant in more detail. Like, what does it mean to have quick links? Is it quick links that the whole company can access? Is it department-based? Is it personalized? Is it personalized, but you can enter arbitrary links, or you have to pick from a list of provided applications? And through that, we were able to help manage the scope and bring it back to what the actual budget was. So there's been a lot of very interactive negotiation and really finally defining the details for what we could do. And I think for most of these features, we got pretty much what was needed while not investing a lot of time into small, insignificant parts of it. So we had these features defined, and we had to make a pretty, I want to say challenging, but interesting decision. Do we go classic publishing sites, or do we go modern communication sites? So mind you, this decision was happening right around the last October, November timeframe. And it was not, it wasn't a very simple decision to make. On one hand, we've been doing publishing sites for a very long time. We've known the limitations, we know the capabilities, we had a bunch of reusable assets. That was the known way of doing things. Communication sites were something new and shiny. They had a lot of great features. They are responsive out of the box. Microsoft gives you a number of different modern, pretty user-friendly web parts to use along with it. But more importantly, it's also the direction that Microsoft is going in. As far as I know, they have not invested a single feature into the old publishing way of doing things since about 2014. So if we look at it from, aligning ourselves with Microsoft, it was pretty clear that going with modern communication sites was the right way forward. So we decided to start this journey with the modern communication sites. And it wasn't without challenge. We'll talk through that in a bit. So now that we had the features identified that we were going to build for this first phase, we had them in a pretty good level of detail, down to exactly what information the components should show, how they should interact, what are the core capabilities that need to be integrated. And we started our typical wireframing and design process, where we started with high-level wireframes just to understand the page layouts and the different priorities of the content on top of the page. And then we moved it forward and we started creating some wireframes. First, we created black and white wireframes, then we enhanced them with a little bit of color. What you're seeing here on the left is a wireframe, a colored wireframe with sample text, sample images, that was reflective of the different components that we were putting onto the page. What you see on the right is a sample article page. And as a pretense, we did blur a lot of the information on here. Some of the information that you're seeing is actually live production information. So we were very fortunate that Ironwood was granted us the ability to showcase some of this. But of course, it makes sense that sensitive information needs to be censored. So that's why you'll see some blurriness. It wasn't in the wireframes, it was in this presentation.
So are these two different iterations?
No, so these are two different pages. So on the left, you have the home page. On the right, you have a sample article page. And in subsequent slides, we'll go into more details into what are these different components that really made this successful.
A question from online. Somebody had asked how the data was collected for those one-on-one interviews.
Well, so we started every interview with a templated Excel file where we had a large number of questions that we wanted to discuss, but we really handled the interviews as more of a discussion than as a question and answer. So we captured our notes based on how the conversations went. So
they were done in person or
yes,
small groups?
The one-on-one interviews were done one-on-one.
Oh, okay.
And when I say one-on-one, it's a little deceiving because it's one person from the client plus the one team of TrnDigital. So typically we had about 2 people from TrnDigital per one interview, just so that we could discuss while one take notes and trade off.
Okay.
But yeah, good question.
Awesome, thanks.
Did you say how many people were remote, how many people were in the field versus the office? I think you said.
So I don't have that exact breakdown, but roughly 50% of the organization is in headquarters, and the other 50 works remotely, different offices, or in the field in sales.
Did any of those people get interviewed?
They were, and those were over a WebEx. We try to align some of those interviews when they were holding sales events at headquarters, but given timing, most of those happen to be remote. And actually, just to take that one step further, since it was a question, we really like doing one-on-one interviews because it lets people talk without being overly concerned about what their peers might think or make sure they have approval of their peers. And then all of the notes that we captured before we filed them as deliverables in the project and we inputted them into our overall matrix, we actually sent them back to the people that we're interviewing. And we asked them to confirm that what we captured is accurate. If they want to change their mind on something that if they thought about it afterwards, they could have the ability to do so. It's kind of, we're transparent, but we also, they knew at the beginning that this is being captured as a project deliverable.
You get a lot different answers when their manager's not in the room.
Yes.
Yes.
So just taking it one step further, we also had 2 other wireframes that we designed as part of this project. What you're seeing here is a high-level sketch of a departmental site, and we also decided to have 2 different layouts available. As we did the interviews, we realized that there were some departments that were very heavy on content creation, and we had other departments that would publish like 1 blog post or 1 article every 6 months. So to accommodate the different types of throughput, we came up with different layouts that would look better with more or less content. And you can see that primarily in the news component here, where we have a 6-story layout here, we have a 9-story layout here. Then we also did a few other variations on the web parts, just to be able to give some level of personalization to the business users. We'll talk a little bit more during the site build out, but we also asked most business users to stick with one of these 2 templates as a starting point and keep the news and the ads in the same spot, but they had flexibility to modify more or less what was below the fold. So if they had multiple links components that they needed or multiple point of contacts or other combinations that better fitted with how their departments operated, they had that ability. And that was not enforced through code, it was enforced through governance, which is something that was a recurring theme as we went through the process. Mike?
Can you talk a little bit about in the know and why it's different from just other links, lists, or subdirectories?
Absolutely. We will go through every one of these components in a few slides, and I'll take that up then. So now that we worked on these visual designs and wireframes as part of the core team, we did a few iterations, and we really had some great discussions and debates about how things should look, how things should be done. Part of the benefit of having such a diverse team on the core team, meaning of different levels within the company, different departments, is that they had different opinions. And a lot of them were very good in coming from people that might not have had a voice because they weren't senior enough or might be too shy to say it in front of broader audiences. But overall, it came together pretty well. And then to take these ideas and to validate them, we held a social event during one of the afternoons where we printed out good-sized posters of all of the different wireframes. And the client was gracious enough to host some food and some drinks to encourage people to come down and have a conversation. And people came down, they voiced their opinions. We had sticky notes, we had a whiteboard to the side where people could write down ideas. And it was a great interactive way to showcase what's coming, but also give everybody else that was not part of the core team an ability to come back and give us some feedback, which was pretty great. The other thing we did to help entice people to get really excited about this new intranet was we held a naming contest for what we were going to call that social space that anybody can post to within the intranet. So this is where people could post their Red Sox tickets, post that they're running a 5K and looking for people to join them or to sponsor a PNC bike ride. I mean, great place. And we actually had a lot of pretty interesting ideas. We first did a survey to collect an initial set that we printed on the board. Then we also had an area for people to write things in. And I think ultimately the winning one was called Word in the Wood. And it was an idea that somebody wrote in and then received a lot of votes. So that's what we ended up going with. But things like these really start to engage people that otherwise might not care that you have a new intranet coming. And it actually gives more people a way to interact and say, I took part in naming that, which is pretty cool. Okay, so at this point we have gone through, we've defined what we were building, we prioritized it, we got to the level of features that were going to be part of day one, we went through the wireframes, we got the look and feel figured out, we got the visual design agreed to. Now we're ready to start building the intranet. Any questions so far? Okay, Arthur.
How many people in the company?
There were about 900 users of the intranet. So new, yes.
Did you roll out, were they using Teams at the same time? Teams rolled out?
Teams was being piloted at the company. So this was done, actually, this probably started prior to the Teams pilot, but yeah. And don't forget, Teams are really associated more with modern collaboration sites that are tied to Office 365 groups behind the scenes. It's more for teams to come together and work. This Intranet was focused more as a communications vehicle on day one. And communication sites aren't really tied to Teams in any way.
Right, but did you have a lot of content on the outdated intranet that had to, like what we're dealing with is content that really needs to move to Teams that really shouldn't have been on the intranet?
Well, let's address that in the site build out. Well, yeah, we'll talk through that. And some of the decisions that were made around that. So the development started. So a lot of what we wanted to accomplish with these features and requirements were not possible with out-of-the-box Webparts. Out-of-the-box Webparts look pretty good for inside pages as you're building out the different information pages and so forth. But for what we needed on the home page and department pages, it seemed like it could accomplish a lot, but it had a lot of drawbacks. We'll talk more as we go through each component for why we decided to go a custom route. But what we did was, everything we built was using the latest SharePoint framework. We used React as the building blocks, which is what the Microsoft team uses for all of their visual components. And we really leveraged a lot of patterns and practices. If you are not familiar with Microsoft patterns and practices, it's an open community repository on GitHub where members of the Microsoft product team, as well as community leaders and community contributors in general, they populate frameworks, which could be something as simple as a wrapper to connect to the graph and pull some information down. It could also be sample web parts or sample scripts for how to provision a new site using the modern API calls, or what's the best way to get started with the modern web part that has to go and do these two things. So we certainly lived and breathed within patterns and practices, and as now that the project has ended, we're actually looking back and seeing where we can go back and contribute back into that from what we've learned. But it was a great experience. It helped us a lot. Of course, all of the stuff was brand new, and the documentation was very much subpar, especially as we started the project. So a lot of it was just opening up Fiddler and seeing what Microsoft does with out-of-the-box components, or looking at the JavaScript version of the components that Microsoft has, trying to deminify them and seeing, okay, where is this coming from? And then you Google that web service and there's no documentation on it. So part of what we had to do was really document some of these risks that we've attached to things that are not documented or not published by Microsoft as officially being supported. But in many cases, it was the only way to be able to get to what we needed to get to. Several components that we built also leveraged Azure function apps because, we'll talk a little bit through that. But essentially, the performance was not always there for all of the different components. If we're on the home page and we're aggregating sources and we have to make about 18 different web service calls, page loads are all right. But if we have to make 800, but say 50 to 60 web service calls, things would start loading pretty slowly. So we used caching on all different levels, but we've also used Azure to help us use a little bit more power to aggregate stuff and kind of take that out of the SharePoint front. And we also learned a lot about how communication sites work, like the fact that back then you can extend the news content type and make it your own. You had to get creative with how things got handled. You didn't have some of your traditional approval workflows that you could build it with SharePoint Designer because you can't use SharePoint Designer with modern sites. There was a lot of other things that really took us for a ride, but we got through it, we figured it out. There was a lot of late nights, there was a lot of coffee. Our offshore team was phenomenal at chugging along, it'll be 8 o'clock US time and they're still online hacking away. So huge props to them. And we also use a Graph API as much as we could throughout the process. For some things we had to leverage the beta branch of the Graph API, but for a lot of it we were able to handle and get info from the main branch, especially when we looked at the customized point of contact web part and pulling back profile pictures and the contact cards, which we'll talk about. So site and content build up. So once we developed these components, and we started developing the department components first so that site owners can start building their departmental sites in a pre-prod mode while we finished developing the homepage components. But one thing that we did, which was a little bit interesting, was we decided to not have a separate user acceptance phase of the project. because a lot of the people that were on the core team were not as familiar with typical SDLC processes, and it also just made sense. So instead of having two separate disjointed things, we decided to bring it together, and we asked the 12 members of the core team to start building their sites as in parallel they were testing our components. And to them, it was a lot more natural because they were essentially not just using it to say, okay, if I click this button, does it do what is expected, but they're actually applying that for their real life sites that they would be, owning and having after the UAT period. So we learned a lot. There were some defects that were discovered. There was a lot of changes that were also requested, things that we never even thought of when we were doing the requirements. And we were able to accommodate some of them. And for the ones that we weren't able to accommodate in the time period, we put that on a backlog for a future phase. But it was really good, and we really got to kick the tires and really get things moving there. So after 2 weeks of the UAT and really working with the core team to implement the sites and build them out, we took on the additional department sites that were not part of the core team. So if you recall, there was about 4 to 5 departments represented in the core team. There was probably about 10 to 15 final departments. So now that we had a stable version that was tested and configured in every way possible, we're ready to take that to a broader audience. Now to answer your question about migration. So part of the challenge of the old intranet was a lot of content was outdated. And instead of offering an automated lift and shift move of content, the decision was made to ask owners to go back and move things across. And ultimately they had about a 2-month period where they had their new sites live, that they could still open the old sites. Sorry, new sites were pre-prod, they were not live yet. The old intranet was still live, and they would go there, and as they built out the new content, they'd be like, oh yeah, I'm missing this file. So they would go download a file and upload it here. The client team also put together some tools for archiving content that nobody took ownership of, or groups that were just no longer active. But in this project, nothing was migrated. In other projects, absolutely. It's always an interesting challenge to face because you don't want to lose anything, but you don't want to clutter the new system. But we could talk offline about that.
Question online.
Sure.
Did you set up a staging environment for testing?
Great question. So the pre-prod, if you look at it from the perspective of what we call environments, if we're deploying code into an environment and it's not a live environment, it's essentially a test environment or a stage environment or whatever you'd like to call it. And because we went live in one big bang, we had the luxury to do so. So we were actually able to streamline, as soon as changes were ready, we were able to take it from our dev, deploy it into this pre-prod environment. Now, the only thing that changed this pre-prod environment from being pre-prod and prod was that we just changed what we called it on day one. Now, future changes, next iterations, we are setting up another environment to go and actually work as that staging environment. But a lot of times with these types of projects, you get a pass on not having one of those on day one, because ultimately you're deploying code in an environment that's not live. Great question, though. Okay, so this is a live screenshot of what the implemented version of Ironworks looks like today. So I want to talk through some of the functionality that we have and really dive into a little bit of detail. So the first thing you'll see is across the top, we have our standard navigation that spans every page within Ironworks. And at the very top left, the first icon you see there is quick links, which we'll show you on the next slide. We have our mega menu, which expands all the different sites, which we'll show you in a couple of slides. And we have a few other key links across the top. The links pointing to a page that talks about an employee's life and career, which is really a landing page pointing to all different HR, finance, and so forth, information that you might need to know as you progress in your career. There's a section we put together called How Do I? That aggregates FAQs from all of the department sites and gives you one easy place to discover as well as search what you should know. And then there's a couple of pages, one on the pipeline, which is really an internal page focused on their development lifecycle, drug development lifecycle, and We Are Ironwood, which is really a company culture page focused on what it really means to be an Ironwood employee and what are the core values that the owners are instilling top down. Okay, so from there, we have this hero web part. So we initially started by using the out-of-the-box hero web part because it's a pretty nice web part. It's responsive. The hero web part. But then we realized we had a pretty interesting requirement. we actually wanted to be able to target news to users depending on who they were. And as part of the core platform functionalities, we were able to target whether a user is an employer or colleague, whether they're Cambridge-based or not Cambridge-based, because there are a lot of Cambridge-based events that would not be applicable to them. We're also able to tell if they're lab employees or not lab employees, and also if they're part of the Salesforce. Yes?
How did you tell that? Was that an AAD attribute? Was that in the user profile?
Great question. So we built an Azure AD engine that would go to the HR system, which was Oracle HCM. We would pull back a custom report that they were able to create for us that showed us a number of different parameters about each employee. We applied business logic to determine what was the right mix of that. We stored that into a database in Azure. And then we had a separate job that would read that database, see what changed, and push that into the user profile store. The user profile store, we have 5 attributes, actually 6 if you count the quick links target. And it's just, is colleague, is Cambridge employee, is that. And then we combine the 2 when we render it.
Complex. Instead of just using properties in AD,
Well, I guess the question is, what is more complex to connect a third-party HCM system to push certain attributes into AD that would then also be synced from Azure AD Connect into Azure AD, and then sync from Azure AD into SharePoint profiles? You can get away with some fields, but if you have pure custom fields, there's a good chance one of these steps along the way will not make it across.
Sure.
In fact, I'm not sure if they fixed it, but there was a long time feature gap where custom properties in Azure AD were not imported into your SharePoint user profile service. That might have been fixed, but in any case, we had a much more complicated pipeline, so we decided to go that route.
With your engine, you push the data, you finally push the data into Azure properties, or
We push it into SharePoint Online User Profile Service.
user profiles?
Yeah. So because of this custom component, we needed to build a custom hero component, which is exactly what we did. To the right of that, we have some ad space. So we wanted to separate ads from promoted content because the content that's being promoted in the hero web part is really intended to be the news articles that are either published on the root of the intranet or in any of the subsites. Whereas we wanted the ads to be something that could link to external places or really link to file. I mean, link to anything that just a generic link. But we wanted to highlight it because in the previous intranet, there was a dedicated area along the right side where it had all sorts of different promotions that were different than in the know promotions or different than the news promotions. Yes.
I'm not following what you mean by ads. What do you,
So like
conceptual example?
so internal advertisements. So let's say we're having a blood drive next Tuesday. I might put up an ad that says, reminder, Tuesday we have a blood drive.
Using do you build a separate ad engine, and do you put those ads in more than one place?
Good question. For this first build, every ad is just local to the site that has the ads list behind it, but it is targeted. So if we're having a blood drive in our Cambridge office, somebody in the field Salesforce doesn't need to see that, so they wouldn't. And similarly, if they're having like a field sales, annual meeting coming up, they want to really highlight that on the homepage, they can do so without affecting non-sales employees. So
also the audience.
exactly, it has the targeting.
And where are you drawing the line between what's an ad and what's company news?
For the homepage, corporate communications owns the page. So they have a set of guidelines for when they would put something into one area versus another. Generally speaking, if it's a news article, it'll go into the hero web part. If it's anything besides a news article, including an external link, it would go into the ads. Yes?
Were you able to get this to work right on mobile?
Yes.
So
Yep. So the next section below here is an alert section. So this section is usually collapsed unless there's an alert. So an alert is typically something that you need to know right away. Like, we have a snow emergency, don't come into work tomorrow. Or if the labs are being closed for maintenance on certain dates, it's good to have a reminder there targeted to only lab employees. Or in one example here, they were paving the south entrance sidewalk, and the sidewalk would be closed for a few days. So you don't put general things in here. These are really like facilities related, or if there's like a phishing scam going around that day, you can instantly send a message that will be visible. But most of the time they'll be collapsed, which is a pretty cool feature to really push out important info.
is that custom one part?
Yeah, also targeted. So from here, we have 3 different categories of information below. We have company news, your news, and word in the wood. With the old intranet, there was one feed of news And it didn't matter if you were selling Red Sox tickets, or there was an important corporate announcement, or finance was having an ice cream social coming up. It was all just based on descending order of last published date, which really made it difficult to take a quick look to see, what do I need to know? I have 2 minutes before my next meeting versus, I have some time to click around and look at the classifieds. So we broke it down to 3 categories. So company news is owned by corporate comms, and this is information that everyone in the company will see irrespective of their job role, and really made to be not updated as frequently as these other sections will be, but they're really to push out the company-specific messages. Your news is aggregated from all of the different all of the different departmental sites and initiative sites based on targeting. So if HR is pushing out a new 401k program, they're not going to target that to contractors because it doesn't apply. If they're doing something else that's more related to a different group of people, they have the ability to do so. In fact, when we first started the project, initially we were considering doing targeting based on department in addition to based on employee role. But throughout the course of the project, we realized there just isn't enough content being generated to make that a worthwhile feature. So we really simplified it to about 5 or 6 targeting options.
You have a limited set of reportable, so it's not that.
Right, and it made it more reasonable. So like in past intranets, when there were large global companies, you might have finance writing a specific piece of content that's targeted to specifically employees that are part of this department. That doesn't happen with companies of this size as often. So it's always a balance between, how granular do you want to be able to target somebody versus how simple do you want to keep it for people to be able to go and author content and not have to fill out 100 questions to get it published. And then we're going to the social space, so anyone is allowed to post here. And whoever posts there gets sorted by the the creation date. So that's the one open spot. And I mentioned earlier that Ironwood has a great culture. Part of their culture is that all employees matter, and their voices need to be easily heard and populated on this intranet. So there was a very strict guidance from the leadership to not make something that's so locked down that only a small number of people can post, but there needed to be that open social forum. So while we kept the departmental sites locked down to those department content creators, we left Word in the Wood completely open. And to manage permissions, we also have a flow that when you make a post, it'll go and break permissions, it will grant you access so you can make modifications and nobody else, plus the intranet authors group, which is corporate comms, IT, HR. So if you write something bad, they can go and actually delete it or edit it.
Nice.
Okay, so scrolling down the page, we have industry news on the left side. So industry news is news that's outside of the company. And one of the feedbacks that we heard during our interview process was that a lot of employees are so in tune with what their day-to-day jobs are, sometimes they miss what's happening in the industry around them. So the initial release was, and there was already a team in the company that was going in and actually creating this type of information that was being sent out as newsletters. So in the first release, we just made this based on a SharePoint list where you would paste the URL and the title of the article, and then it would look up the logo based on another list that we have and show it here. We're actually just about to go live on an enhancement to this component where we're querying a bunch of RSS feeds, storing that into a database. Corporate comms can then just select which ones are applicable, and then it gets populated into here, as well as an automatic newsletter generated based on that content. So that's, I think, going live later this week, if not early next week. Upcoming events. So this one also is targeted. It aggregates from all the different department sites. And this one tosses us for a little bit of a loop. Initially, we wanted to use the search engine to go through and collect all of the events because it made sense. It's what search engines do. The unexpected problem we ran into was regarding recurring events. So the search engine does not expand recurring events. So the only way for us to really understand if an event should be listed here would be to query all the events happening within like the next 10 days or 7 days, and then also query every single recurring event in the system. And for every one of those events, expand them to see if they have an event that happens to fall on this date. Because recurring events could be like every 4th Thursday, every other month, things like that. And we realized that was going to actually kill the system. It'll take forever to load the page. So we built an Azure aggregator for this one as well. So every 15 minutes or so, we have a job that goes out to every site, pulls all the events into a database, and in the database, we expand the proper things. Yeah. So then this web part looks at one web service that is tied to that database, and the web part itself doesn't have to do much thinking. It just pulls back the data that we're doing server-side code to actually calculate. So that was pretty
How
cool.
do you sync that Azure database to deal with things happen dynamically?
So when it reads from a list, it basically checks to see what the IDs are, and it checks to see what was modified. So it knows what it needs to update, delete, or add. And we did a lot of testing on this component, especially I didn't know this about SharePoint calendars, and I've been doing SharePoint for a long time. But if you create a recurring event in a SharePoint calendar, there's one list item ID that's tied to it. But let's say I want to go and delete next month's recurring meeting, but just that one instance. It'll then create another ID associated to this one instance that I deleted, mark it as deleted. So now for me, from programmatically to figure out if there's a meeting next month, I have to look at multiple IDs, and they're not linked in any logical way. It's actually way more complicated than it should be. Yeah.
I've run into issues with reoccurring events in SharePoint calendars, and my answer has always been, let's use an Exchange calendar, and just display it here in SharePoint.
There's no out-of-the-box way you can still do this.
No. And with Exchange calendars, you lose the targeting option, which was one of the key features here. Because in our interview process, we had very, almost 0% adoption from the sales force with the old intranet, because in their perspective, everything on the intranet was related to Cambridge, and it wasn't applicable to them. So as a drive to really make sure that if I'm in sales and I open this up, what I see is relevant to me, we really put in the extra effort to make that happen. And by the way, the feedback, especially from the sales team, has been great since launch. There's been praise left and right that this is actually a tool that is helpful for them, because not only does it work on their phones, because in field sales and farmers, for biotechs, you're not on your laptop, you're on your tablet or your phone 24/7. It works, and it works well, and it's relevant info. So I mean, that's a great formula for adoption. On the right of that was Ironwood on social. So this was a social feed of what Ironwood is communicating out publicly. And this is basically for employees to see, what is the company communicating out to the rest of the world as a message, and what are the events that they're really interested in. So we found that to be important, especially as social efforts are becoming more relevant in this day and age. Employee Spotlight. So Employee Spotlight was an interesting component.
I'm sorry, real quick. Is the Ironwood on social, is that custom also?
Yes. So they have Twitter Webparts, I believe, that you can grab, or LinkedIn ones, but they don't merge them together.
It's not that good looking.
It's not good looking, and there's other challenges around it.
That's way better looking than the out-of-the-box solution.
Do they make sure that's stuff, so it's from their feeds
Yeah.
and no responses from?
Exactly. Other companies and internets in the past, we did show live feeds of what people are saying about the company. It gets ugly.
It's ugly.
And I mean, we had to pull the web parts off from past intranets because, there's bad publicity and everyone's ranting at them, and then the home page is full of swears and everything else. So things have to get adjusted. Not here though. We learned our lessons. We made this official outgoing messages. And we also built it in a way where in the future, if there's other social mediums that become more popular, whether it's Instagram or Twitch or whatever is the next thing, we can expand it and add more in. This also uses Azure as well, because if you have every employee from your IP address hitting Twitter every 15 minutes or so, you're going to get DOS pretty quickly and get banned. So we actually do it one time on the server side, and we push what we find into a SharePoint list that this web part then reads from.
You did a list instead of an Azure database.
In this case, we decided to use a list. We didn't see, because the amount of volume wasn't that high, it didn't make sense. Whereas on the RSS feeds for industry news, we're talking thousands and thousands of articles every week. Here we're talking one every few days. Employee Spotlight. So this is actually kind of an interesting web part. In our interview process, we had a very divided company. So some employees wanted to say, show us just the new hires on the homepage. We know everybody. We've been here a long time. We only want to see who's new. And with the field sales staff coming back and saying, we don't know what anybody looks like and people are working with, so forget the new employees, we want just employee spotlights. So after a number of back and forth, we decided to compromise and make one web part instead of two, and have corporate comms dictate who is being highlighted every quarter. So the way that this web part works is that we have a SharePoint list behind the scenes We limit it to about 50 or so items, but people to be added into that list. Along with that, we ask them to populate the hire date and then a fun fact about them. And typically in employee onboarding, that standard question that HR collect. And then this web part will randomly show you somebody out of that SharePoint list every time the page loads. And then every quarter, when they have a process to highlight another set of employees, this will change. So it's pretty cool and gives you a fresh face every time you load the page.
So it's a list of 50 people, but every time the web page loads, it randomly chooses
Exactly.
one of those 50. That's cool.
And 50 is an artificial cap that we set just to keep performance reasonable.
Yeah.
Initially, we said 10, but that was the same people over and over again.
Yeah.
So we expanded a bit. The feature photo is just a photo. Ironwood takes a lot of great photos at a lot of different events and functions, and they have a pretty good digital asset library. Well, Nick's smiling over there. They have a lot of great content for a digital asset library. So we wanted a place just to showcase a little bit of what's going on. And then we also have one more thing, which is what they call Build Our Future. And this is really an employee referral type program where they post a few of the key jobs that they're looking to fill, along with instructions for employees about referral bonuses and a bit of that to get people interested. So the important thing is that when we look at this homepage, it was really prioritized in terms of information from top down. And we spent a lot of time going back and forth around moving components around, what should go where, what should appear in what scenarios. And there was a lot of thought putting into doing it this way. So I mentioned quick links before. So there was a lot of discussion about what we should really do with quick links. So we decided to break it down into 3 things, similar to how we did on the homepage. So we have company quick links, which everybody sees. We have departmental quick links that is based on what your where your targeted data is, which department you're aligned to. Then we have my links with an edit button, where you can put any kind of link that you want to any system. If we hover over the sites, we have our mega menu for easy navigation. So we have our different departments listed with some headers that are a little hard to tell with the blurring. And then we have some corporate initiatives on the right side that are really company-wide and not tied to any specific department. Another thing to point out, when promoting information into that hero web part, initially we just had a SharePoint list that said, okay, hero web part, give me the title, give me the URL, give me the image, and give me the targeting, and we'll showcase that, whatever's in this list. And we did that because if we had to go to every department site real time and see what's being promoted in every department, it would add a lot of performance issues, so we decided to keep it simpler. But one thing we did is we built this interface where on the left side, it shows you, based on publish date, all of the news articles across the entire internet. And somebody that's in corporate comms can come into this page, check off an item that they want to promote to the hero web part. They have the ability to either use the same image or change the image, depending on what would look better in that smaller space that you have in the hero web part. They're able to change the title. If the title is very long, or if they want to abbreviate things or change things or tweak things, they have that flexibility. Also define the core values, which we'll talk about in a minute, the targeting information, the publish date, and the expiration date of the promotion. So this gives a really simple interface to come in and say, okay, I want to promote these articles for these dates.
How do you handle that? You get a forwarding and
Yeah, so this is a client-side customization that we did. The left side is driven by the search engine, and the main area is driven by a React form. This was the life and career page I mentioned before. It's a really simple page, but it's very powerful because it gives a one-place stop for employees to go to find information of, I'm thinking about retiring, where do I go to find that information? Or I'm being promoted to a manager. What kind of information should I know about being a manager? So things like that, that really point to different sites because HR owns some of these links, finance owns some of these links. There's potentially other groups that also own some of these links. And instead of employees being confused, like, if I want to do my 401k enrollment or make changes to my contributions, do I go to finance or do I go to HR? And every company does it a little bit differently for where that function lives from a business perspective. But this one page gives you a one-stop shop to go to, and then it takes you to the corresponding sites.
I have a question from
Yes.
online. Our buddy Jared asked, how did you hide the middle site logo following etc. plus search box for the mega menu? Just overriding CS?
We overrode CS when we needed to, yes. we also used, so the SharePoint framework offers what they call extensions. The extensions give you a place in the header where you could inject pretty much any type of code that you want. And that's essentially what we did to get that mega menu and that bar into that right location, as well as add any kind of CSS that could override the DOM at render time. And as you'll see in the next couple of slides, we also did some other cool things that we were able to do by injecting into that header area.
Same thing, menus. For the menus.
Yeah, that's how we got the menus in there. Yep. So I mentioned the how do I page. So every department site has an FAQs section, and the FAQs, they can select whether it's a promoted FAQ or not promoted FAQ. If it's a promoted FAQ, it'll show up on this page. If it's not promoted, it'll still show up if somebody does a search. And by doing search, they can basically just search the FAQs. And if you click on any of these, it's an accordion. So basically it drops down and it shows you that FAQ all in one page. We found this really helpful because a lot of times you have short snippets of information where it's not worth having a full page dedicated to, how do I submit my expense report? Or how do I order new lab supplies? Whereas having just a quick FAQ, like this is where you click to go do it, made more sense. And then we also added this box up top did you find what you were looking for? Yes or no? And if they say yes, great. If they say no, it gives us an alert. But ultimately, this writes the feedback into a SharePoint list, including what they were looking for from the search box. And we have alerts set up on that list to notify us when there's feedback received.
Do they offer any further information if they say no, or is it just a binary?
I know in one prototype we had an extra box that popped up for more comments. I don't recall if we went live with it or not. But, it's certainly possible. Right now it's being sent to the SharePoint support distribution list. So everyone's notified unless there's feedback submitted.
So if they said no, what is it submitting back to them for the feedback?
Well, it says thank you for your feedback. Behind the scenes, it writes the feedback into a SharePoint list. It says this user on this time searched for this keyword and they did not find what they're looking for.
Include the keywords.
Yeah, and then the support team can follow up with them to see what they're looking for, and it might have to actually be like, okay, well, what you're looking for doesn't exist on the internet. Let's go talk to the department that should own this piece of information, ask them to go create it.
So they're actually providing resources to actually monitor that list.
So at the moment, it's going to the SharePoint support DL. I'm sure if the feedback grows to be enormous, there might need to be a community liaison or a different role created to manage that. But we just launched about a month and a half ago, so we're still at the early stages.
How many people do they have on their SharePoint team?
Good question. So there's a number of people. They're not all fully dedicated to SharePoint. There's a managed services team that we offer. And we have about 5 people, 4.5 people dedicated to that, plus 2 in-house employees. And there's other people that have a say or a word or own different parts of the intranet, especially like corporate comms and HR and other areas. So it's kind of hard to put a number on it, but at this point, there isn't one person whose sole job is just the intranet. The intranet is part of their responsibilities of other things as well.
So have you gotten the business to actually buy into managing their content?
Yes. So that was a strong requirement that the steering committee was able to help us socialize.
That's hard to do with a lot of these biotech companies to get them to want to do that.
Yeah.
So we have a question from Christine, who asks, are the metrics analyzed from an end user searches to identify an FAQ that may not be listed?
So in the case that somebody does not submit a feedback, do we track that? It's on our roadmap to go back and start taking a closer look at the search analytics. But given that we've just launched the system, there probably hasn't been enough data for us to go back and really examine. But that's certainly part of the governance roadmap.
It's more of a phase 2. So
not even just phase 2, but I mean, I think that's going to be part of the overall governance that we're establishing, where on a regular basis, we need to make sure people are keeping their content up to date, taking a look at what people are searching for, where the drop-offs are. Things like that will be important to make sure that we continue to have adoption as it continues to grow.
awesome.
Okay, so here's the next page I want to talk about, which is an article page in edit mode. This looks pretty much out of the box, except it's enhanced. So we inject a few fields here that are actually pretty cool. So the first field is core values. So everything at Ironwood is really driven through the 6 core company values. And part of what the Intranet is to help communicate out those core values. So one of the requests was to have the ability to tag any page that is created with which core values this page ties back to. There's only 6, so it's not a lot of overhead, but it's a good way to, at the end of the year, take a look back and say, okay, how much of our core values were, what do we create content that's related to innovation or related to having fun or related to collaboration in some of the other areas. We also have the targeting here. And you can see here we pre-selected a few targets, all lab employees and contractors, all field sales employees, all Cambridge employees. We have a publish date, which defaults to today. We have an expiration date, which defaults to 1 year from today. We also have a governance policy that the expiration date can never exceed 3 years at a time. So if you try to set it to be 2025, it'll go back to being just 3 years from now. We also had a couple of optional checkboxes here. So one is around compliance. So when we were interviewing the employees in the beginning, there was a lot of concern coming from R&D employees that they're going to write a post or they'll share some information that they're really excited about, but the sales team can't see it because it's, you have to keep the 2 things separate, or they're really excited, but it's something related to IP and they don't know if the patent's been filed yet for a specific thing. So it's up to the employees to decide this, but if they wish to ask compliance to review it, they can check this box, which will then, upon publish, send off a flow to go into their compliance office where they could review it, provide feedback, and send it back to the user for final, go make these changes and then click approve. Similarly, we also saw a lot of employees were just shy posting because they were afraid they're not going to use the right grammar or they're going to word things incorrectly. So there's also an optional corporate communications review, which will send it to the corporate comms team, have them provide their inputs or edit it directly and send it back for publishing.
Send to grammar.
Yes. There's one more field that we don't have in the screenshot, which was the ability to ghostwrite on behalf of somebody else. And we've implemented a special list that says who is allowed to ghostwrite on behalf of who. And if and only if you are on that list and you're allowed to ghostwrite on behalf of somebody else, you would get a box that pops up here that says on behalf of. And you can choose whether you want to write on behalf of yourself or an executive or somebody else that you might be writing on behalf of, which is pretty cool. And the reason I bring that up is because when we built this new page metadata pane that was just released did not exist yet. So we needed some way to tie the metadata in from the page onto the content type. Now that this panel is available, we still can't go 100% panel because this custom logic behind the ghostwriting needs custom code to really function right. So we're still thinking through how we want to address this, whether we want to just ignore the panel and keep this as is for this intranet, because we have a very specific set of fields that we have for these pages, or do we want to do a split mode where we have some in the panel, and maybe if you're on behalf of, you have some special functionality that you take care of. It's still brand new, so we're still exploring it. But we expect that as time goes on, Microsoft is going to start taking some of the things that we have already done and bringing them to be more out of the box, which we're fully ready to embrace. But the marketing machine is sometimes louder than the actual development machine, and we have to be careful for what is being projected versus what's actually being implemented.
Well, are any listings on user voice now?
The targeting is on user voice, and that's actually on their public roadmap. The pane just came out recently. I haven't seen ghostwriting on user voice, but I feel like that's such an intricate, detailed requirement that they'll probably get to a lot of other things first. Mike?
Are you using Flow for the content approvals?
Yeah. Which is actually another challenge that we faced, because you cannot trigger a flow based on when a page is published. You can trigger a flow when a page is created, and then you can trigger a flow when a page is modified. So how do you tackle this thing of only sending out this approval flow only if the page is published? So what we did was we kick off the
anytime modified and then look at approval status. Or the published status.
This essentially. So we have to make a flow that kicks off when the page is first created, and then it just continues basically looping for a number of days while it looks to see that the published state is set to 2, which means that it's published. And only in that case it goes and kicks that off. And to keep flows from running forever, we set a limit of like 30 days on it. And we actually just ran into our first issue where someone created a page like 31 days ago, and they finally decided to publish it with approval request. And that flow showed us terminated, so we had to manually restart it. But challenge that we're facing, yes.
More questions?
Sure.
Do you have you noticed any kind of?
Good question. I would say like third quarter of last year, we had a number of problems with flow not triggering always or getting stuck for no apparent reason with timeouts. It's improved a lot in the fourth quarter of last year and first quarter of this year. I'd say from what we're seeing, it's pretty stable at this point, but I wouldn't be surprised if you do run into challenges here and there.
How do you handle the compliance issue until it gets to be used? Is it secure? Is that data secure?
So it's only accessible to the site owners. Yeah, so keep in mind, this is not for the word in the wood, right? This is strictly for the departmental and company-based information. So a set number of people for every department have access to go and create content there.
This is for all the departments, and these later get aggregated up.
Yeah.
So this is, yeah, something.
Yep. And then based.
Something that checks that it shouldn't get aggregated? You might not want to go up?
So again, so this is not sensitive content.
Right.
This is just content that needs approval before it gets published to all of Ironworks. Now, in this scenario, we set the ground rules. Everything in Ironworks is going to be visible by all employees. So don't put anything confidential there. The only one exception we did was for R&D, which they have a special R&D secure site that only gets aggregated for R&D employees. That's security trimmed based on part of this profile import engine that we built. We also populate a security group based on certain metadata. And that's a separate discussion.
But it's a separate site, or you put that in?
It's a separate site, but it works with the aggregation and with security trimming. I didn't want to go, I'm not going to go too far into that because it's actually a bit complex of how it all ties together. I want to keep focused here. So I have about 7 minutes left. I do have a few more slides I want to get to. So the article page upon publish mode. So again, we're not doing anything with the body. We're leaving the comments where they are. Across the top, we put a back arrow because we realized out of the box article pages don't give you the ability to get back to the page that you came from. So we put that in. We put the author here, which again, the out of the box news article page doesn't tell you the author once you're inside the page. It'll tell you if you're aggregating from the news web part, but not here. So we added that there, we added the publish date, and we put the values that you select, the core values in the top right corner, kind of as tags. So it's pretty cool. I have a few slides I want to go through about department sites, and then I have a few closing slides. So this is what a sample department site looks like. This is their essentially their HR site, and this is known in most companies. They refer to it as talent, team, and culture. So a few things. So we had this banner across the top, which the out-of-the-box banner almost met our requirements, but the out-of-the-box banner doesn't give you the ability to have like a mission statement or tagline underneath the title. So we took a step forward and made that custom. We have our news here. So instead of using a hero web part on the department sites, we use a carousel where if more than one item is promoted here, it basically has the arrows and the different dots here. And whatever is not promoted but recently published would appear directly below it. Events are showing events that are part of the site. We also made a decision pretty early on that all content in a department site will not be targeted if you're going directly to the department site. Because if I'm going to a sales site, even though their sales team meeting might not apply to me, I'm going to their site, so I should see kind of what they're working on, what they're doing. So targeting is really for homepage filtered views for phase one. For phase one, this is all, everyone can see everything. And then we have ads along the right side, where there's also up to 3 ads that they could do. So Mike, to answer your question from earlier, along the same lines, so your news is pretty much highlighted up here in the carousel and displayed over here. This is for everything else. So this could be going to a site page that's not a news page, or it could be going to an external link, or somewhere else to really promote information up top that's really important.
So you're doing filtering, so if you go to the home page, you're getting user-centric content based on the attributes.
Yeah. If we scroll down the page, so we see that in this view, the news web part actually spans 2 rows because this is the one that shows you more news content. We have some links here. So these links could be pointing to different site pages, could be pointing to external systems. If we can see one of these links is out to ADP. These are pretty much your standard links that you have on a department site. This is also custom because we wanted a very specific look and feel. We also wanted the ability to prioritize them, to define an optional description line below the link, customize the icon. The out-of-the-box link component was able to get us halfway there, but after a lot of back and forth, they deemed this was an important feature to have. Point of contacts. So another thing we wanted to customize. Yes.
Dimitry, sorry, are the links, can the links be list driven? Or are they
It is
all
list
linked to the data?
It's list driven. In fact, just about everything on this page is list driven.
Oh, cool.
This also lets you separate the need to actually go and modify your page and, fat finger something and move things around from just going to your list to manage your content.
That's awesome.
Point of contact. So the out-of-the-box point of contact little icon of Webpart is great, but it doesn't tell you what your role is within the team. Right? It'll tell you what your job title is, but not really what you do. So we took that premise and we took it one step further, where this is also list driven, and besides just your standard information, we also have tags below. And the list that drives this has a tags column. And you basically say, okay, reach out to me for benefits information, or I'm accounts payable and accounts receivable. So at a glance, you see who to reach out to for different point of contacts, beyond just saying, okay, I'm analyst 3 HR, right, which doesn't really tell you what they do. We also implemented the functionality where if you hover over, it pops out the contact card, then it takes you to the full thing. That was a lot more complicated to do than you would ever imagine. Microsoft gives you the UI fabric, which gives you that contact card, which looks great, except it doesn't actually populate any of the content. It's a placeholder UI element for you to populate yourself, and we weren't going to get into that business. So we did some hacking of the URLs and seeing how the out-of-the-box one worked, reverse engineered some of the calls, put it in here. It works today. It's one of our things to keep an eye on in case Microsoft changes things in the future. If I scroll down, we have key files. So key files is actually an out-of-the-box web part. It is the only out-of-the-box web part on this page, but it fit the needs of what we needed, so we left it as it is. Subgroup listings, this is essentially another links web part, just displayed in a different format. And some departments that have multiple subgroups that really needed their own pages, they leverage this web part. Others just renamed it and continue using it as a secondary links web part. So it's, it is what it is. Nothing too exciting there.
Subsites are a no-no still?
What's that?
Subsites are a no-no?
So you cannot have a subsite in communication sites.
Okay.
Or at least not a communication subsite. And site help and feedback. So this is something that we've used that we've built into Intranet over the years, and it's been received very well. Because if you're on a site and you need help that you can't find some information, it's not always easy to figure out who to contact. And if you're new to the company, you might not know the person, or you don't have a quick way to say, whoever maintains the HR site, I can't find the latest pet insurance document. How do I get to it? So they can submit the feedback here. This goes into a SharePoint list. The site owners for that site get alerts on that list. So when somebody replies back, they get an email that says, you have this feedback. And then part of the governance is that they should be responding to the feedback by either pointing users in the right direction, maybe they need to add additional tags or name their files in a way that's a little bit more searchable. Or maybe they need to go and populate a placeholder that says for pet insurance information, contact so-and-so. But basically, they have like that feedback loop coming in from your users for what content they're struggling with on your site and what you can do to help them. Then FAQs are your FAQs, it's question answers. It's an accordion component. You click on it, it expands out the answer. And then if it's a promoted one, it shows up here. If it's not promoted, you click on See All. You can see the full laundry list of all of the different components and FAQs there. Any questions so far?
That was custom too, FAQs
Yeah.
and priority.
Mobile navigation. So we, as a principal, decided to not do anything special in mobile because the communication sites give you a pretty good mobile experience out of the gate. So we just need to make sure that our web parts that we built them in a way that was not necessarily responsive, but just responsive friendly. So don't use tables, use div tags. Don't use floats in a way that would break a responsive page, which is what we did. But we did have to customize the mega menu because the mega menu in native SharePoint online browsers or in the SharePoint app tries to take you to the site structure, which makes sense. But we really needed to go more into exactly how we built out our hierarchy. So we built this custom component that renders only on mobile pages. This is the mobile view of the homepage. It's really hard in presentations to take a mobile web page that's really long and show that to you in a horizontal screen. So I basically kind of imagine like the top of this is actually the bottom of here, and the top of this goes to the bottom of here. But we've also built these web parts in a way that they don't all start pulling from the server when the page loads. So the first few start pulling from the server, and then as you scroll down, the rest start to basically go in and make their web service calls. So it's one thing that we did to really make sure that the first page load above the fold, it had good performance. And then in the background, it would start working on the other ones, or as you scroll, it would expedite those.
That just part of the web page, the web part would get hit until it scrolled, and you have to do custom coding to prevent that.
Well, so most of these are custom components. So we basically use a promise pattern to make sure that we specified what we needed, but we also gave the order of what we needed in. Okay, any questions before we go to a few last slides here?
Quick question, did you think about using Yammer for the wood in the?
Word in the wood?
Word in the wood?
We did. So part of our interview questions were to really understand what are the social capabilities that really made sense. And to be honest, Yammer just confused a lot of people because, it's one of those things where you need to have not just conversations, but you also need to have files and you have calendars. So part of what we tried to find is that if there were like special interest groups. So like some organizations might have like, 20, 50, 100 different specialized interests, like, bowling league, a softball league, you name it. And for those types of communities, it actually makes sense to have all these different features where they can go and chat and everything else. In this case, we realized most of it was just posts of people, selling information or raising awareness or doing charity events. So we realized that having a group for every one of those didn't really make sense. And it also didn't make sense to leverage Yammer for just one group. So the approach that we took on day one was to keep it more simple. And then as things evolve and grow, we might reconsider it.
So I was gonna say, how much of that is, because you've got a 900-person company, you probably have, what, about 400, 500 people on site in Cambridge?
Sure.
About that? Is that a big enough company to really effectively utilize Yammer?
I could spend hours talking about Yammer and the good use cases. I think you raised a good point, but I'm going to table that conversation for the moment. So project communications. So one of the things that we did throughout the course of the project is also to keep the proverbial drum beating around change is coming, get excited, get ready. Part of it was enhanced by that social hour that we had with the wireframes printed in large formats. But we also had blog posts that were posted on the existing intranet. We also actually created a shell site for the new Ironworks just for communicating information out. And that was actually being linked to from all of the blog posts on the old intranet. So people got a bit familiar with what the UI looked like the ribbon, the header, that type of thing. Emails, occasionally, we try to stay away from emails for this project. Surveys, one thing I didn't mention was during the requirements gathering, there were a few areas that were contentious where the teams were split whether or not it should be there. Things like showing like weather information or traffic information. I forget the exact details. So we did actually send out 10 questions in the survey to the entire company to collect broader feedback beyond who attended the social hour and beyond the core team. And that helped us shape part of our direction forward. We also did a lot of posters that we hung around the office, showing the different things that were coming. And actually I have a couple on the next slide. We had events. We had a launch day celebration, which we'll show you in a couple of slides. And there was also digital signage throughout the office where we had just rotating, PowerPoint slides, a part of the overall communications that, change is coming. These are the new features. Get ready. What does this mean for you, et cetera. And these are some of the posters that we launched. So we tasked everyone on the core team to come up with 4 or 5 bullet points at the bottom here for why this new intranet site is going to be helpful for their users and people coming to their site. And then once they finished building out their sites, we also took a high quality screenshot. And when we would meet on a weekly basis, we would basically print out a stack of 20 or so of each poster. And we did like 1 poster a week for the weeks leading up to it, and just hand a stack to every core team member and task them with putting them up around their areas of the office. And a lot of them are still up to this date, but it was a good way to spread awareness and kind of get people to understand what's coming, what they're going to be able to see. And the actual posters were high quality, so you could actually read the text on them. It was pretty cool. Go live, we did another event on the day of launch where we printed out the final versions of the content that the content creators were creating over time. We even had some Velcro things like the Mega Menu where you put out any of the pages just to kind of showcase how things work. And we had another Velcro over here of like the org chart that comes out of the box. And there's another opportunity for people to come in now that, on day one, the homepage of everyone was set to be this new Ironworks. So by the time we had the social towards the end of the day, people have already had a chance to poke around, see what they like. And we really had this as an ability for them to come ask us questions, get clarifications, give us some ideas. Overall, it was pretty well attended. And we had some good information there. Okay, so post go live, the go live went very smoothly. I think there was only one issue reported, and it was related to special permissions. And we got that resolved right away. But we transitioned this into our managed services, which continues to support this and continues to enhance the different areas based on the backlog. We did use Planner, and we still use Planner to create today, internally we use Visual Studio Online to actually do our real development and our real backlog tracking and point assignment and everything else. But because we're involving some of the business stakeholders into these conversations, we didn't want to have to teach them a full SDLC and how to really do this because they're giving us an hour of time a week. It wasn't appropriate. So we actually use Yammer to create buckets for like high priority, medium priority, low priority, to be determined. And we meet on a weekly basis to decide what are the most important changes to make. Some of them are very small. Like for example, on that hero web part on the homepage, we recently just added a byline to appear below the title. And we changed the font size of the title a bit. So small things like that, as well as bigger things like the whole industry news where we're building that whole automation thing that's about to go live. So it's a great place for us to keep things essentially located. So now that we've launched, we're moving into maintaining a lot of the same project stakeholders to start forming the governance body that will be meeting on a regular basis. As part of the governance, we're going to make sure that content is fresh. We're going to make sure that as Ironwood evolves, they're going to be still relevant and will make changes to support the ongoing changes with the company. And we're also going to start looking at analytics, to your point earlier, to really start refining, what are the zero search results? What are the pages that people are not paying attention to? We're also keeping a close eye with Microsoft because they are rolling out more and more page level analytics, and they're opening up their activity APIs on the tenant level to give us more insights. So we haven't prioritized analytics on that planner log yet, but once we do, we'll probably tie it with Power BI and get some cool dashboards out of it. So that's all. One more question.
We have a question from online.
Yes.
Christine asks if there were post one-on-one interviews scheduled with the same folks you interviewed during the assessment planning stage as a comparison from before to after.
That's a good question. We have not done that. Most of the feedback that we have collected have been through the channels, meaning through the core team, from what they're hearing from their colleagues and peers, as well as the steering committee. But that's a good point. I mean, something that we could consider as a follow-up survey potentially. But yeah, good feedback.
What did you put for your launch day? Like what day of the week did you launch on?
So we had an unofficial soft launch on a Friday, which we did like a Friday at 3 p.m. But knowing that not a lot of people would probably see it, but it gave us an ability to test a few things out. One thing we also did was we enabled tenant acceleration, or tenant login acceleration. Okta was being used as the identity provider with Office 365. So every time somebody would go into their page for the first time in the day, they would be prompted to basically click login 2 or 3 times. Not necessarily re-enter their password, just click login to get to it. With login acceleration, we pretty much force them to go straight into Okta the second they log in, get their token and come back. So to them, they reduced their clicks down to 0, which is pretty cool. So we tested that out. It's a tenant-wide setting that you have to configure. So we did that Friday night. And then we monitored over the weekend, make sure that there was no challenges, everything was working as expected. Monday morning, everyone came in, they had the new intranet, and then Monday afternoon, we had the social.
What is the size of the development team?
I'm sorry?
Development team, what size is it?
So the size of the development team, we had, we had a different size at different phases of the project, right? When we were doing the initial architecture and the wireframes and the design, we had 2 architects on the team. I was also part of the core team. And then when we got to development, we expanded that to about 3 additional developers that were going pretty much full time. And then for specific functionality, like when we were building the Azure pieces, we brought on somebody else that had more experience with server-side code as opposed to TypeScript and React. So I'd say the team size and structure fluctuated a bit throughout the course, depending on what our priorities were, but it wasn't an army, to answer your question.
Another question from online, how about training, not just analytics, for continued and future end user adoption?
Great question. So the training that we've done to date has been more for the content creators, to really train them on their sites. And you know, when let's say we had a new department coming on, we didn't give them an empty site and say, here, go build this according to this like Lego wireframe. We actually pre-built these sites with sample content for every one of them, and we deployed that through PowerShell. So when they came in, they were just making changes to a template as opposed to starting fresh. And that also helped them, you know, get 80% done and then come to us with questions like, you know, how do I change this title, or how do I adjust the title a little bit, those types of things. From an end user perspective, ongoing training and ongoing marketing of the portal itself will be important. So as we're setting up these governance committees, you know, ongoing education is absolutely critical. So we will be hosting lunch and learn sessions, webinars, and things as the platform, you know, not just how to use it today, but how to use it tomorrow when Microsoft rolls out 10 more new features that you can take advantage of. All right, we'll take that question offline. So everyone, thanks for coming out today. Let's definitely keep in touch. You can find me on Twitter, LinkedIn, our company, TrnDigital. We have an online presence through our website, and we're expanding our social media presence in the coming months. But if you're building an intranet, or you need help building an intranet, or you need help fixing an intranet, let's talk. We'll be happy to help.
All right. So thanks again to Dimitry for that awesome presentation. Very helpful. We have some upcoming community events that we want to talk about. July 28th is SharePoint Saturday in New York City. This August, the 26th through 29th, we have SP TechCon coming to Boston. More on that a little bit later, but anybody here planning on going to SP TechCon? Everybody planning on going? Anybody who hasn't gone, I highly recommend it. Tons of really awesome information. I always walk away from that deciding that I need to rebuild everything I've ever touched. So it's kind of a curse and a blessing. And there's also the Microsoft Ignite conference in Orlando, Florida, which is coming up September 24th through 28th. And then October 20th is SharePoint Saturday New England. And that's going to be in this building, right? I believe so.
Yes.
I believe that's going to be right here. All right. Are we missing anything? Anybody else know of
If
anything?
anyone is interested in PowerShell, Jeff Stover is going to be talking at the
I like PowerShell.
PowerShell user group meeting next Tuesday.
Okay.
Where's that?
And where is that? Yeah.
Let me check. It's at a Wayfair right here. It's
Okay.
actually it's a Biogen in Cambridge.
Okay.
So it's on Meetup.
Awesome.
You need to sign up because you need to get in through the door.
Okay. Gotcha.
Talking about PowerShell 6
Okay.
core.
Nice.
So,
All right, cool. Well, we have a link to them right here. So here are some other fun user groups in there, including the PowerShell one that we were just discussing. All right. And then our next event is going to be a very special event. We're going to be hosting over at SP TechCon. We are doing this as a joint event with all the other user groups in the area. And we are going to be doing an experts sort of roundtable sort of thing. I'm going to let Dimitry explain how that format works because it's new to me, even though I will be one of the experts on it.
Yeah, so we're actually doing a pretty cool event. So instead of having a speakers panel where you have a few people on stage answering questions that not everyone might be interested in, we're going to have all of the experts that will be part of this event. I think it's about 40 or so, last I checked. And it'll be basically like a table format, kind of what you're sitting at now. So every expert will have a seat, and there'll be a seat across from them. So you'll basically have a chance to speak one-on-one with any of the experts that are at the event. They'll be grouped by specialty areas. And then every 5 or 10 minutes or so, we'll blow a whistle, and you have to get up and find a new partner to talk with. So we're trying out this new format. It worked really well in SharePoint Fest Chicago last year. And we're going to try to introduce it. I'm sure we're going to learn a lot from doing it the first time. But it's a pretty cool event. It's being co-hosted by the New Hampshire SharePoint User Group, or Allen, Boston SharePoint User Group, us, Cambridge SharePoint User Group. And we have experts from all over the country, if not world, coming in. Most are speakers at Ayrapetov. This is a free event, but registration will be required. Just like in past years when we've done this, you need to have a new badge to get past security.
That's in place of our regular.
That is in place of the yeah, this will be the next, this will be the only August event for this group. All right, and that is on a Tuesday, and it's at 5:30, and it's going to be at the Sheraton Boston Hotel. How do you register for that? That's an excellent point.
So
you can go to sptechcon.com, I believe.
So the free registration for this is not up yet.
Okay.
If you're attending SPTechCon, you're already in the door. We will keep you posted as soon as
We will be sending out a link in our regular newsletters, and we'll also tweet about it a lot as it gets closer. And we'll actually have a meeting about that tomorrow, too. Yeah. So that's going to be a big deal. Should be lots of fun. You know, like I said, there's no purchase necessary. So even if you guys aren't attending SPTechCon, it'll kind of be a good way to get that kind of international sort of flair that SPTechCon brings to our own little user group. So I think that'll be really exciting.
And if you want to attend SPTechCon, we do have a $200 off promo code for our user group.
Too.
So just come talk to us and we'll hook you up.
Yes. All right. And now we turn it over to you guys. Any problems or tips anybody would like to share with the group? Anything anybody's run into that's had their head smashing against their desk this week? No? Really? SharePoint's working perfectly for everybody?
Just end users.
I don't believe you.
Well, SharePoint 2010, so you can't help it.
We can help that.
It's actually almost easier to help you on SharePoint 2010.
Yeah.
Well, I'm getting ready to migrate to 365.
I was going to say, we have this migration package that we offer. So.
Every time I think I got it all worked out, I don't.
So I have an interesting one that I happened to run into just today. And that was, and I don't know that this is new, but it was new to me because I discovered it today. And that is that there is an attribute that you can set in with PowerShell for the SPO tenant that will enable certain special characters in folders and file names. So Microsoft has built in an override for some special characters. Now, right now, there are only 2 special characters on that list, and those 2 are the hashtag and the %sign. So if you happen to run into users who use those a lot, you can enable that through a bypass. I just ran into that today. I have no idea if there are any consequences of doing that, so please don't hold me responsible if it makes things explode. You know, as always, test a lot.
I thought we were going to turn that on for, like, I thought that was going to be a default at some point. We're going to have to.
It seems to me like, you know, if you're going to enable it, yeah. So the fact that it's not makes me a little weary of it. But it could just be that they're testing it because it also does have a note in the official documentation. The way that the note is phrased is really interesting. It says, at this time, these are the only 2 characters allowed by this setting. So they're kind of implying like, we will be expanding this. I have a couple of clients that they aren't lawyers themselves, but they have clients who are lawyers, and lawyers have a tendency to put pound signs in their file names right before their case numbers all the time. So this is kind of immediately huge for one of my clients. So super cool. But anyways, anybody else? Yeah.
Anyone using Hyperfish?
Anybody?
So it's a third-party application. They got bought by Live Tiles, and we use it for best Active Directory hygiene. And it can create self-service capabilities to let users pick or subscribe to, specify what skills, projects, interests, etc. It writes back to AD. It has bots associated with it, so you can actually create outbound pushes to people, saying, it looks like you're interested in these things. Are you? Check this box. Yes. It automatically updates AAT. You can have an approver approve it. That's a good way to get kind of that profile completion process. We've done it for a few fields. We intend to do it for a lot more as targeting becomes more important.
So
it can also do some smart stuff on profile pictures as well. So you can actually set some guidelines like your profile pictures.
Right.
It mustn't have more than one
Simpsons
person
character,
or a cartoon or a pet in the background.
Yeah.
Some smart
It's really
habits as well. Yeah.
There needs to be seen what
I
Live
didn't realize
Tiles
they
will
could
do
do
with
it.
it.
No, I didn't realize they bought
Yeah,
it.
but I think they're pretty committed to its compliance.
So are there any extra hoops that you need to jump through to get that data into the user profile service online?
I think the normal things you would do to get, attributes from AAD. To
Yeah,
the
just
profile service.
DirSync will push it?
This is just writing to AAD. My understanding, I'm not,
Yeah, we looked at it. Yeah.
or I'm not an identity guy.
It seems too complex to get set up.
No.
Interesting. All right,
Yeah.
that's very cool. Yes, Dimitri.
I have a tip. We faced this in the last few weeks. So we had a client that had an on-premise SharePoint environment, and we were setting up a third-party identity provider with SiteMinder so that SiteMinder could just collide to SharePoint. Well, Microsoft's documentation for the PowerShell commands to set this up is completely wrong. The client has SharePoint 2016, and somehow Microsoft's documentation said like SharePoint 2010 to 2016, this is the way to do it. But they reference commandlets that don't exist and the syntax is not valid. So I spent quite a few hours trying to find the old version of the TechNet documentations, and they're like scraped from the internet somehow. So part of my some of my to-do list is actually go and submit a pull request into that documentation to fix it. But if you're playing with that specific scenario of just trying to fetter your SharePoint on-prem environment, just be aware.
Can you check, are there any questions from online? And other than that, anybody hiring? Anybody looking for a job?
There are a couple of people rolling off of the project that I'm working on at the end of September. So if you need a solid VA, I can recommend a couple of people. I think the devs are going to be highly occupied.
Yeah.
They're really so super talented. A couple of really good VAs. If you need people who can build sites, they're not developers, they're configurators, but they've got a lot of experience with modern.
Okay, cool. All right, so some BAs available. Anybody else?